When 23-year-old Wilma Nissen stopped communicating with her various foster families, they hoped she found a better life somewhere else. But the truth was, she was a Jane Doe far from home, and it would take diligent police work and the daughter she left behind to start putting the pieces together. Now, what they need are more leads. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to Crimelines. This case is one that was recommended to me by another podcaster, Nina of the Already Gone podcast. Not only did she recommend the case to me, she has also covered it, and she sent me the base research done by Charity Dodd, so I want to thank both of them for that. And a huge thanks to Chrissy, the daughter of Wilma Nissen, who took time out of her day to talk to me. And then after we talked, she went over the entire script to make sure that what I'm putting out there is accurate. We are going to start with Wilma June Nissen, who was born on October 19th, 1954, to June and Charles Nissen. They were in their early 20s when she was born, and she was the first of three daughters. When Wilma was about a year and a half old, according to Find a Grave, Charles and June had a second daughter who did not survive. And then in early 1959, their third daughter, Mona, was born. Mona was deaf and she could not speak, so Wilma really had to look out for her, especially after their mom, June, left the family when Wilma was only 8 and Mona was just 4. For some reason, Charles had neither of the girls in school and opted instead to lock them in a bedroom closet when he had to go to work. It wasn't long after June left that Charles lost that job, and then the three of them were living in the car. Charles would make Mona, who was just 5 or 6 at the time, stay locked in the trunk. Wilma was 9, and Charles would have her go out alone to try to get food and money for them. The lack of care and the abuse these girls suffered is hard to fathom. And because they were not in school, it went undetected, but not forever. Eventually, social services was alerted to the situation, and Wilma and Mona were taken into care in late 1964 at the ages of 10 and 6. They were not placed together, possibly because of Mona's special needs, and Wilma was taken in by experienced foster parents, Marshall and Maxine. When Wilma joined their home, she was 10 years old and couldn't read, write, do basic math, or even use a fork. Realizing how severely neglected Wilma was, they started teaching her how to do all of these things in the hopes that she would get caught up. They told the Argus Leader in 2006 that Wilma was an eager learner. Once she got access to education, that is what she wanted. Wilma's first Christmas in foster care was the first real Christmas she ever had. And when she turned 11 in their care, they threw her a Snow White-themed birthday party, something she never experienced before. And Wilma soaked it all up. She even started calling Marshall Dad right away. She very much wanted and needed the love and attention Marshall and Maxine gave her. And they found Wilma to be a polite, happy child, especially considering the circumstances she came from. Honestly, Wilma could not have landed in a better home. And in talking to her daughter Chrissy, it's very clear that if Wilma had stayed there, this story would have turned out completely differently. But in 1966, after nearly 2 years in their care, Wilma was removed from the home. Maxine had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and her symptoms were severe enough that social services closed out their foster home. According to Chrissy, this was not what the family wanted, but because the children in their care were foster kids and not adopted, the state had the right to remove them, and there was nothing they could do about it. Wilma then spent time in 4 different foster homes in short order before being placed in her final home with Alice and Vince Haas as her foster parents. Even though she wasn't living with Marshall and Maxine anymore, Wilma did stay in contact with them as much as she could, and she even visited them. Landing in this final foster home was not the end to the instability. In May of 1968, not that long after moving in with the Haas family, Wilma was sent to the Mountain View School for Exceptional Children in Ramona, California. This was a private residential school for students with learning disabilities, but who were believed to have the potential for training in a skill or trade. Many of them were believed to be able to meet educational standards in a specialized setting, a setting the public schools were not required to provide back then before we had protections like free appropriate public education and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Wilma stayed at the school until August of 1972, just 2 months before her 18th birthday. Though the school itself did not have an upper limit for age, students placed there through agencies like those in foster care left at the age of 18 because that's when the funding stopped. Not a ton is really known about the time Wilma spent with Alice and Vince since she was at the residential school most of that time. But we do know that Wilma had visits and she managed to stay in touch with her sister Mona through Mona's foster parents. They even got to see each other. There is a picture Chrissy has of Mona and Wilma together in August of 1970 when Wilma was 15 and Mona was 11. And according to what has been reported by Vince and Alice, we do know that on Wilma's 18th birthday in October of 1972, she walked out the front door going for a walk, they thought, and then she didn't come home. It sounds like it was a while before they heard from her again. Then, in the summer of 1973, Wilma married a man named Don Wellington. She was 18 and he was 25, and within a short amount of time, according to arrest records, Wilma was engaging in sex work, though it is believed this was not of her own free will. We have to look at the broader context to come to this conclusion, but we do have a somewhat older man, a woman looking for love and stability, and Don Wellington had a record for pandering, which is the legal term for turning someone out. Beyond that, it's worth noting that Wilma was arrested on suspicion of prostitution 6 times, and all of them were while she was with Don. After they separated, the arrests completely stopped. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office told the Sioux City Journal in 2006 that they believe that this illustrates an aspect of Wilma's personality, that she was not the leader in situations. She was the follower. She was the one influenced or pushed or coerced into things, in large part because of her upbringing. She was always looking for the person or the thing that was going to make her happy, show her love, and give her, again, some stability. And there was also an element of survival sex work here, since the money brought in was what kept her from literally living on the streets. In May of 1974, Wilma gave birth to her first child with a man named Michael. The exact circumstances of this are not known since she was still married to Don at the time, but she named the baby after Michael, so she was sure he was the father. But we do know she was back with Don when she had her second child, another son, born in December of 1974. Yes, the boys were born in the same year. This second son was obviously premature, as he was born just 7 months after his brother. According to law enforcement, both of these births were confirmed through records, though Wilma did not have custody of either of the babies for long after their births. There are some photos of her with her son Michael as an infant, but the details of when he and his brother went into care are murky. There was a rumor at one point that Wilma and Michael had left California in an attempt to move to Florida and had their son taken away by social services somewhere along the way. Michael's brother has confirmed that Michael, who died in 1989, did move to Florida, but the brother was not aware of Wilma or any child. So it doesn't look like Wilma went with Michael when he left for Florida. By the fall of 1975, Wilma was away from both Don and Michael, and she was instead dating a man named Bob Irvin. Chrissy has a photo of them together from around Wilma's birthday in October of 1975. And then in August of 1977, Wilma and Bob had their daughter together, Chrissy, the one I interviewed for this episode. She was, like her brothers, born prematurely, and she only weighed around 2 pounds. Wilma ended up leaving the hospital and then not coming back for her baby. No one really knows why, but again, context gives us some clues. Her other 2 children had been taken from her, so she may have assumed she wouldn't be allowed to keep custody of her daughter either. Chrissy was also born prematurely, like I said, and the care of such a tiny infant may have been too overwhelming for Wilma. Not able to face it, and frankly not having a ton of examples of how to be a parent, she left. Chrissy was then placed in the care of Alice and Vince, Wilma's last foster family. As for the father, Bob Irvin, he couldn't seem to find Wilma after this point. He called Wilma's sister's foster mother to ask if Wilma had called to check in on Mona, as she would often do. According to the foster mother, Bob made a comment about wanting to help Wilma get the baby back, but in the end, Bob signed over his rights and the state couldn't contact Wilma, so they terminated hers. And within a year of Chrissy's birth, everyone stopped hearing from Wilma. That included the foster parents Wilma had kept in touch with up to that point, and Mona and her foster family. It's like she just fell off the face of the earth. So Chrissy grew up without any contact with Wilma, and her adoptive parents, who were 65 and 71 when she was born, would not tell her much except that Wilma left her at the hospital. That was all Chrissy knew, but she wanted to know more, so, like the little detective she was, she went snooping looking for any paperwork that would tell her about her birth parents. When she was 12, she found her original birth certificate with Wilma and Bob's names on it, and she found a photo of Wilma, but her adoptive parents took it away from her as soon as they found out she had it. Talking to Chrissy really transported me back to this time period when people were still debating whether adopted children should even be told they were adopted. Given that Alice and Vince were older than typical parents, more like grandparents, I imagine they grew up with the idea that a child won't miss what they don't know about. It's an extension of tabula rasa, aka blank slate theory, but research has shown that it is a lot more complicated than that. And while they could take away a picture of Wilma, they could not take away Chrissy's knowledge of what her birth parents' names were. Now, she didn't have a lot more to go on than just their names, and she didn't have support in her search for more information. But the names were a big deal, and those were what Chrissy could use to get started. She looked in phone books for people with the same or similar names, and she would just call them. In her later teens, Chrissy did get a little help in her search. She even had a talk show trying to help her find Wilma. But by that point, Chrissy was not even living with her adoptive parents anymore. They had placed her outside of the home when she was 15. They said they couldn't take care of her any longer. At 17, Chrissy did get some more help on her search because a friend's mother, Starla, took the information that Chrissy had and started doing her own research, and she was able to find Chrissy's father pretty quickly. Chrissy even got to meet him a few times, though he had little more information on Wilma than anyone else had. When it came to Wilma, though, Starla could not find any trace of her. Maybe she had moved away, and maybe she was going by a different surname, or maybe she was living on the outskirts of society and just didn't leave a footprint behind wherever she went. It was also possible that Wilma was deceased, but Starla found no evidence of that either. When Chrissy was 20, she was able to get online, and she started putting her name out there on adoption registries. But answers didn't come until February of 2006 when Chrissy was 28 years old. Chrissy lived an entire lifetime from the ages of 18 to 28, and that included moving out of state for a while, but she had moved back to California when her adoptive father was ill and needed care. So one day, Starla came over and asked Chrissy to confirm her birth mother's name. I mean, Wilma Nissen is the kind of name that sticks with you, but Starla wanted to be 100% sure before she told Chrissy what she had found. And she had found this purely by chance. Starla was reading the local Long Beach newspaper when she saw a little blurb about a Jane Doe that had been found out in, of all places, rural Iowa in 1978. They had only just identified her nearly 28 years later, and the article gave the name Wilma Nissen. Starla wanted to be sure she had the right person before she broke the news to Chrissy. And when she did, Chrissy called the sheriff's department to make contact and find out what was going on. So this story requires us to back up to October 4th, 1978. A 19-year-old telephone lineman was laying cable along Iowa Highway 182 between Larchwood and Inwood. Even people in Iowa are saying, where right now? Because this is such a rural area. It is in that northwest corner, about 20 miles outside of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. As this young man was working in a very overgrown ditch, he came across a woman's body laying face down less than 2 feet from the edge of a gravel road. When the authorities came out and moved the body to get a look at her face, they realized that much of her face was gone, including her lower jaw and all but 2 teeth. She was found with faded green denim pants wrapped around one leg, multicolored bikini underwear, and tall white go-go boots. There was a braided rope around her legs tied with 2 different knots. The rope did not appear to be tight enough or secure enough to have bound the woman, so it's theorized that it was used to move or drag the body. On autopsy, cause of death could not be determined, though it was believed to be a homicide. It was estimated that she had been dead since mid-August and had been where she was found that whole time. The reason she had not been found sooner was that the property owner was pretty much absent and the weeds were over 6 feet tall. A road maintenance worker who drove that gravel road periodically to smooth it out said that he never noticed anything, even though her body was within 2 feet of his truck. They had no local missing persons reports that matched the woman's description, which was a female about 20 to 30 years old, 5'5", 100 pounds, and with dark blonde hair. According to the original reporting in the Des Moines Register back in 1978, the police were inundated with phone calls from worried parents who hadn't heard from their daughters in a few weeks. Every single local lead was run down, and they got nowhere. They put images of a ring she was wearing on the news and in the papers, hoping that someone would recognize it. Then they sent her description out to law enforcement across the country. And they did get a few leads in other states, including as far away as Oregon, but they all ended up being dead ends. The Emmy was able to get 2 fingerprints from one hand to make a fingerprint card, and an artist did a facial reconstruction in the hopes that it would bring in some tips. Even though the reconstruction would turn out to be pretty accurate, it didn't lead them to Wilma. The body was then buried under a marker that just said unidentified female 1978, but locally she was known as Our Girl. It's clear that certain investigators and members of the public never forgot about her, even though the case grew cold so quickly. 22 years after she was found in 2000, they submitted her prints to a national database to see if they could get a hit. If they're using the database I'm assuming they used, IAFIS, it launched in 1999. So they were using it pretty much as soon as it was available. Unfortunately, this didn't work. They did not get a hit. But then in 2006, they decided to try again. The database had been up longer, so more fingerprints had been uploaded to it, particularly older ones being pulled out of dusty case files. And this time, they got a match. Jane Doe's left thumbprint matched a fingerprint card of Wilma Nissen from an arrest in Los Angeles from 1973, back when she was with her first husband, Don. And they learned her body had been found just 2 weeks before her 24th birthday. The match was made at the very end of January 2006, and it was announced in February. And by the time this hit the papers, the investigators had already started to build out Wilma's backstory. It was tricky, though, because Wilma, as we know now, was in foster care. Birth records got the investigators the names of her parents, Charles and June, but they wouldn't know anything about Wilma's life in 1978, even if they were still alive, which they weren't. Charles died in 1986 and June died in 2003. The investigators did have some pieces thanks to Wilma's arrest records, like how she used the alias Boots. This does sound like a stage name if we're talking about someone in the sex industry, but this was actually a nickname that she used with friends as well, on account of the go-go boots that she loved to wear. That is important because someone listening right now may not recognize the name Wilma, but they might remember knowing someone named Boots Wellington, which was her nickname plus one of her married names. Another alias to remember was that she would sometimes use Amy as her first name. The investigators got a big break in the case when Chrissy called the Lyon County Sheriff's Office after she saw that article. She let them know that she was Wilma's daughter. Though they did a DNA test to be 100% sure, the information Chrissy did have lined up with what law enforcement had already built out about Wilma's life. Chrissy even faxed them a picture she had of Wilma, and they confirmed it was her. Chrissy did not have a lot of information on Wilma, but her first set of foster parents, Maxine and Marshall, did. They gave the police everything they knew, including that they had thought of Wilma frequently over the years, and they hoped she was doing well and had simply fallen out of contact. It is really clear how much Maxine and Marshall cared about Wilma. Wilma's life in California started coming into focus for the investigators, but what they couldn't figure out was how Wilma got from California to rural Iowa, and we still don't have the full picture. The Lyon County Sheriff in 2006 was determined to solve this case, and I have to say, I think he got closer than we see in most cold cases. He used resources around the country and he tracked down everyone he could, unfortunately, often finding out that they had already died. But from what has been pieced together, 23-year-old Wilma Nissen left California in early 1978. According to a man named Charles Belt, he was asked to drive Wilma from California to Atlanta, Georgia, where he was from, because someone was trying to hurt her. And he agreed. Not only did he drive Wilma to Atlanta, she moved in with Charles's mother, Juanita, and had filled out a document trying to change her last name to Belt in February of 1978. But Wilma did not stay in Atlanta for long at all, according to Charles. He said she moved out of his mother's apartment after maybe 2 weeks. Wilma left so suddenly, according to Charles, that he had no idea where she went. His mother, Juanita, might have known more, but she had already died by this point. The next point on the timeline that they have is Wilma being in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, working as an escort and dancer during the summer of 1978. Someone wrote an anonymous letter to the authorities saying that they saw Wilma on August 26th, 1978, which would have been right around the time she was murdered. They have requested that the letter writer come forward, but they have not. The investigators have not determined how Wilma got from Atlanta to South Dakota as far as knowing who drove her there, but it does sound pretty obviously like a trafficking situation. Wilma had no friends or family or contacts in South Dakota, so she had no reason to want to go there. We also know Wilma had every risk factor for sexual revictimization. Prior history of abuse? Check. Maladaptive coping strategies? Check. Lack of a strong support system? Economic vulnerability? Now that last one we can highlight, check, underline, and capitalize. Wilma was at high risk for sexual revictimization. It's not clear if Wilma possibly had a contact in Atlanta, which is why she wanted to go out there, or if she met someone there. But it is likely that person lured her to South Dakota with the promise of a better life. But the investigation has not been able to determine who that someone was. Then in 2007, the Sheriff's Department decided to try another line of investigation, and they exhumed Wilma's body to see if they could use modern forensics to get more evidence. They did a new autopsy, but the forensic anthropologist in Iowa still could not determine the cause of death, so they took her remains to New York for another look. This time, the cause of death was determined, but it has not been released. I have been told it is both unbelievably brutal and also very specific, and that is why the investigators are holding it back. If they get a confession or a hearsay confession, like this person told me they were involved and here's what happened, they will be able to fact check it. As far as getting DNA after the exhumation, unfortunately, Wilma's coffin had taken on water, and that destroyed any trace evidence. That said, DNA testing was done on the rope and Wilma's clothing from the scene, but it had to be amplified, and the sample was not enough for an entry into CODIS. It is worth pointing out, though, that more than one person's DNA was found. One major lead came not through forensics, but from literally knocking on doors. They canvassed the homes within 5 miles of where Wilma's body was found, and it is really surprising how many people were still living in the area 30 years later. The investigators learned about a man who used to host parties at his house in the 1970s. He would hire dancers and escorts from Sioux Falls to come to the parties with him and his friends, and word was that Wilma was one of them. The man, John Van Gameren, was in his early 80s when they talked to him. He first admitted to hosting the parties, but when they subpoenaed him to come in and answer questions under oath in June of 2009, he claimed he only ever hosted 2 parties, and they were just dancers, not escorts. This was not believed to be true, so they charged him at the age of 82 with perjury. They said he lied to them about details surrounding these parties and transporting women across state lines for them. These perjury charges were dropped several months later, and it is presumed it's because he decided to tell the police what he knew. It has been stated he is not a suspect, but he may have been connected to a suspect through his parties. Wilma worked these types of events through an agency, and 2 other women within that agency, known as Sugar and Peaches, were known for robbing other sex workers. Sugar's real identity is known, and she has been interviewed by the police. She has denied involvement, though she failed multiple polygraphs. In 2016, the Sheriff's Department released her photograph to try to get more leads, and they said that after Wilma's death, Sugar fled to Canada. Fled is the word they used, not me. In Canada, Sugar allegedly stabbed someone, and then she had to flee back to the United States. As for Peaches, they do not know her real identity. What has been released is that she was a light-skinned Black woman from Canada who worked with Sugar in the Sioux Falls area in the late 1970s and possibly into the early 1980s. In 2016, when this information on Sugar and Peaches was released, so was the motive. The investigators said that they believed that Wilma was killed at or after one of these parties in Lyon County when people, including possibly Sugar and Peaches, tried to rob her. The reason there was a media push in 2016 was that they were actively trying to get people who went to those parties to come forward. Even after identifying some of the people who were there, many of them would be incredibly defensive when approached. But by that point, 38 years had passed, and the investigators were getting really tired of finding a lead only to learn that the person who might have the information they needed had already died. They wanted to talk to the people while they were still alive. The investigators do not think that the partygoers were necessarily involved in the murder, and the statute of limitations for whatever happened at that party had long since expired. So there was no reason not to come forward. So to anyone who went to any of those parties, look, literally nobody cares if you went to a party at John's house in 1978. Nobody cares. It's a different time now. Let whatever embarrassment you feel go and reach out to the authorities. Like I said, partygoers are not suspects in this case. You may know something you don't even realize you know. And if you're more like my age, in your 40s, but your dad was living in Sioux Falls or Northwest Iowa in the late 1970s, ask him about it. It could bring answers to a cold case. The authorities are specifically looking for anyone who knows any information on Wilma Nissen, aka Amy, aka Boots Wellington, and how she got to Sioux Falls in 1978. From there, they want to know what she did during the 6 months or less she was in the area, and they also want to know more about Sugar and Peaches and the robberies it is alleged they committed. They would also like to hear from the letter writer who said they saw Wilma in late August 1978. That person may have been the last one to see her alive, and there was a reason they felt compelled to go to the police. Now, if you're listening and you don't know anything about this case, but you do feel motivated to help get justice for Wilma, Chrissy is trying to increase public awareness of the case and get some media pressure on it. So what you can do is recommend this case to your favorite true crime podcast. I will send them everything I have and get them in touch with Chrissy. There are modern DNA and genealogical tools that could be tapped into. It seems the sheriff's department is hesitant to do this, possibly because they know DNA is destroyed in the testing for it, and they don't want to use up whatever samples they have just to get inconclusive results. But Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick has offered assistance in the case, and she knows better than anyone how important it is to preserve evidence. I cannot imagine she would move forward unless she knew there was a decent chance at answers. In October of 2025, the current sheriff did speak with Sioux City Radio about the case, and he said they were looking into some technologies like MVAC, which is, to put it in the most simple terms, a wet vac that can extract DNA that cannot be just swabbed or cut out of items. I'm not an investigator, I'm not an expert at literally anything, but I think it is worth throwing everything at it. Wilma's killer, or more likely killers, would be at least in their late 60s, if not older, if they're even still alive. The chance for justice is now, not in 10 years or 20 years when maybe a new DNA testing method comes out. Another way Chrissy is trying to get more media coverage on this case is to get access to more information. Inspired by Lonnie's Law, which we talked about in the episode on Lonnie Rogers, Chrissy has a petition to get families more access to details in cold cases. Access to that information allows the family to seek outside help, like private investigators, and it allows for more media publicity. Chrissy experienced something that I have heard from other families. They have the interest of a bigger true crime production, podcasts, and TV shows, but they will not cover it without police cooperation and or at least limited access to inside police information. They don't do what I do and just pull from publicly available sources. So they need to either ask the police questions or see the information for themselves. When a sheriff's department will not go on record with a media source and they won't open up the file, the case does not get the publicity it needs. Protecting information to ensure the integrity of an investigation is important. But when we're talking about decades-old cold cases, there needs to be some balance between preserving the integrity of the case and giving families the tools they need to actually get answers. I will leave a link in the show notes to Chrissy's petition, and you will also see where to go if you do know anything, and also Chrissy's website and Medium articles and everything you need to learn more about this case and to keep updated on it. After all these years, together, we can help find justice for Wilma Nissen. It is time for November birthday shoutouts. I love the month of November. 2 of my kids were born in November. Some of my very best podcast friends like Justin from Gen Y, Lainey from True Crime Cases with Lainey, Eric from True Consequences, and Nina from Already Gone. They're all November birthdays. Not just that, but it's the holiday season, so it's all about cooking and baking for me. And if you follow my personal Instagram at CharlieandKC, you'll see that's pretty much all I do. So I love this month, and I am so excited to send some birthday shout-outs in one of my favorite months of the year. And I want to say a very happy birthday to Crystal, Allie, Jackie, Hope, Rondeer, Megan, Rosemary and Benjamin, Susan, Anna, Justine, AR, Preeti, Leah, and Tammy. I want to wish you a very happy birthday this month. I hope you got to celebrate all month long, and so from me to you, happy birthday.